Good evening. Welcome to our Bible study tonight. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 4. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. I guess it's just going to be me and myself tonight. Everybody awake? Everybody, I know what it is. It's such a beautiful day. Everybody would just rather be outside, right? We can have class outside. What? All right. So before we pray, I don't know if many of you are aware, but the founding pastor, Richard Atwood, his wife passed away today. And so just thought I'd pass that information along. For many of you, you have no idea who that is, and that's okay. But for many of you, you do know she was battling cancer for a while, was actually in remission, but just found out not too long ago that it came back with a vengeance. And she went to see Jesus today, which is kind of that weird, happy, sad thing. Because it is sad for us, but man, I am elated for her. Elated. So when we go and pray tonight, let's remember the Atwood family. God, you are good, and I love serving you. I love watching you work. I just love being a part of all the things that you do. But God, one of the hard parts for us is losing people that mean so much to us and have had a huge impact on our lives. But I know that Sandy has done that for so many people. And so it's with mixed emotions that we say thank you for sharing her with us. Thank you for sparing her from any more pain and suffering. Thank you for her life of faithfulness to you and being able to experience the promises, to see them come to fruition when she passed from this life and entered into your glory. Well, we are thankful for that. But we do ask for the Atwood family, Lord. I know that they are heartbroken. I know that many of our church people are going to be heartbroken. I just ask that you comfort them as only you can. Allow them to feel your presence more than they ever have before. But as far as us tonight, allow us to hear from you. Allow us to dig into your word and to see what you'd have us to see, to learn what we can learn from Nebuchadnezzar and the lessons that he learned. And just from this wonderful story, God, I pray that you would teach us great things. Guard our conversation, how we say things and how we hear things. And may you gain the glory in all things. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Daniel chapter 4. So we are coming off of the Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah being thrown into the fiery furnace, not being burned alive, walking out because the king says come out after he saw 4 people. And he makes this quick declaration that obviously there's something special about your God. He still has yet to acknowledge that God is God, but he's at least acknowledging that there's something different about the God of these Hebrew men. Okay? Now we're going to fast forward about 20 years or so. It's probably 20 years since the first dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. So Daniel's probably around the age of 40, which means he's been serving the king for a good 20 years. And remember, the king has elevated Daniel and placed a lot of trust, a lot of responsibility onto Daniel because of Daniel's faith, the way that he carries himself, and just his overall demeanor. There's just something special about Daniel. In Daniel chapter 4, this is going to be the last time that we hear from King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, we don't know why, but at the end, I'll give you some opinions, but we still aren't sure why this is the last we hear of him. However, what he has to say in Daniel chapter 4 is monumental. Some would say it is the conversion testimony of King Nebuchadnezzar. Some would say that it's not really, he really didn't convert. Some would say we can't really tell. However, what I can tell you is I've been around testimonies long enough in my lifetime that testimonies are usually built around 3 things. What I was doing before Christ, the moment that I met Christ, and what happened to me after Christ. And you're going to see in this story, in this testimony of King Nebuchadnezzar, that's kind of what this is built around. So again, it's really up to you to decide whether you think he went to heaven or not. And the good thing is you're not God, neither am I, so we'll let God decide. Right? All right, so a couple of things. There are 2 lines of evidence for this being King Nebuchadnezzar's words, his actual testimony. 2 things. One is the literary style resembles his normal speakings, how he's been recorded in the past. His ancient inscriptions that we can find on the buildings, they're the similar. And then the character of the king agrees with the ancient descriptions. So any kind of historical documents that we see or we can read match what he says and how he carries himself in this testimony. Does that make sense? All right, so let's begin reading. We're going to read the first 3 verses. Verse 1 of chapter 4 of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. How great are his signs and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Now, if we were to go back and look at chapter 2, chapter 3, this man is a different man than what he has been saying in the past. I mean, look again at what he says. I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God. This is a polytheistic type man. He's worshiped a lot of different idols. But now he's declaring that there is a Most High. There is one that is higher than all the rest. He's not denying the rest of them, but he's at least acknowledging that there is a God bigger than all the others. He's also saying, look at how great his signs are, his wonders. And now he's at least proclaiming that his kingdom, God's kingdom, this Most High God, is the only kingdom that's going to last forever. Well, what has changed? What is different? Well, he's getting ready to share with us what is different and what has changed. Now, in chapter 3, verse 29, we find the decree from before, but this is not a decree. This is a bold statement. This is, here's what I know to be true. Here's what I want you to hear, and I wanted to bring peace to the land. This is more of a personal testimony, and he's sharing it with anybody that will read it, hear it, listen to it, whatever. This is for all peoples of all the earth. Now, we don't know if it went to all the earth, but in his mind right now, he has a kingdom that basically is ruling the entire earth. He's conquered everybody that he can possibly conquer. And so for him, he is wanting to share with everybody that he has power and authority over. This is what has happened to me. Now, again, doesn't that sound like a testimony? When God changes our lives, what do we want to do? We want to share with everybody. We want to tell everybody. Well, his life has obviously changed. There's something different about him, and so he's wanting to share. He's talking about all the peoples, the nations, and the languages. And look what he says. He says, peace be to you. Now, he's the ruler of all of the known world for the most part at this point, and it's at peace. There's really nobody to come against him for right now. We know later on that there are, but right now there's peace already. So what kind of peace is he offering to them? Well, it's his testimony. Not his testimony of how great he is, but his testimony of how great God is. And you know as well as I do that when we share how great God is for us, there is great peace that comes with that. Not just to the sharer, but to the hearer as well. So why is this? Because it's the testimony of, again, the Most High God. So he wants to bring them peace. He wants to say, hey, here's where I was, and you're probably in the same boat. Here's who I met, and here's what has happened afterwards, and it can happen to you as well. So verses 2 and 3, we see that it's most likely spiritual peace, even though the Greek word here for peace is more in the general sense. But because of the personal testimony that it is, it's more inclined to be a spiritual peace because of maybe the spiritual unrest of the nations. He talks about the signs, the wonders, and the dominion, the great works. And he recognizes that it's God's rule bigger than anything else. It's God's rule, and it's God's kingdom above his own. Any thoughts on those first 3 verses before we keep rolling? Because it's going to get deeper here in a minute. Not a whole lot in there. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory. I just think it's fascinating that the same guy that just said, hey, we know your God's special, but there's still other gods, is now saying, no, he's the Most High God. Something has had to have happened. So let's go to verse 4. We're going to read through verse 12. Here is part of his testimony. Here's kind of where I was before. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore, I issued a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers came in, and I told them the dream, but they did not make known to me its interpretation. But at last Daniel came before me. His name is Belshazzar, according to the name of my God, which, again, that's interesting. In him is the spirit of the holy God, and I told the dream before him, saying, now, in some of your versions, it may say, in him is the spirit of the gods. Anybody have that? So we'll talk about that in a minute, so don't let that trip you up. We'll come back to that. So again, Nebuchadnezzar is still playing to his multi-God roots, but conflicted with the idea that there is one singular God that is better than all the rest. Verse 9, Belshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you, explain to me the visions of my dream that I have seen and its interpretation. These were the visions of my head while on my bed. I was looking, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. Its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the heavens dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. So we find some interesting takes here in this the revealing of this dream, and he is desperately wanting to know. But I want you to notice first, how many times did you hear me say I, me, mine, or mine? A lot. And isn't that kind of indicative of who we are before Christ? It's a lot about me. I'm going to get mine. I've done this. Me, my, right? It's a lot about me. And so he's sharing his personal testimony of, in this dream, here's where I have been, and here's what I'm experiencing. And he suffers from hysteria, is what many of the writers believe. Hysteria brings about a manic depressive state. It brings about amnesia, to where you kind of are forgetful. It brings extreme egotism and pride, which, again, we just saw that all the way through there. And it runs in cycles. How many times have we watched Nebuchadnezzar, just in the first 3 chapters, go from, yes, I get it, your God is different, to, no, we're going to serve all those gods, to, hey, you need to serve me, to, well, he's okay, we can serve him, to, let's go back to serving me. It's always the up and down. And then even with the manic depressive, he goes from, he's really, really good, to really, really angry, to kind of sanguine, to, now I'm going to kill you, right? Like, there's no even keel through this thing. He's just up and down all over the place. But we find him in his testimony that he is resting at home, and he has a dream. And he's resting from all his conquests and his labors. He's conquered just about everybody that he can conquer. He's built all these amazing buildings, and he has built the palace of all palaces. Actually, it's one of 3 that he has built. And while he's resting, his little nation that he's created is still flourishing. It's still doing really well. It's prospering even while he's not really doing anything. But this disturbing dream causes fear and anxiety in him. Have you ever had those? You've heard me tell you Sunday, like I have those regularly, about coming to church and not being prepared. Like, that's a real fear. I even went to a funeral one time in my dream and did not have my book that has my funeral stuff that I had personally written for this. And I really panicked. Panicked so bad. Like, wake up in cold sweats, panicking. Like, I know it's not real, but it felt real, right? So this king is in a far worse spot because his dream is revealing something about himself that he's not quite sure about, or maybe he is, and he's scared to death to really know the truth. And so what happens with that fear and anxiety, especially with the disturbing dream, he's consumed by the thoughts and assumptions. Notice in verse 5, he says, I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. So he's awake now, and he's thinking through all of these things. He's thinking through all the assumptions, creating scenarios and conversations that will probably never happen, and scenarios that will never play out, but he's playing them in his head. We never do that, do we? We know what kind of distress that creates in us. We get all amped up over things that will never happen, and yet in our mind, they are as real can be. And it causes real fear and anxiety. And that's where we find King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, none of us are as crazy as he is. However, there's a portion of all of us that gets caught up in this drama and this anxiety. And it really can not only emotionally and mentally mess you up, it can physically do harm to you. Which I believe is why Paul says, be anxious for nothing. But in everything, through prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let's talk to God and let our requests be made known to him. Why? Because he wants to give us the peace that calms our hearts and our minds. I love that part because not only do I want my soul to be at rest, but I want the conversations and the voices in my head that keep telling me the mistruths and the falsities that I want to buy into. He shuts those down. And so King Nebuchadnezzar is in a spot and he can't figure out how to get past it. And he's so disturbed, he calls for his wise guys, his soothsayers, his magicians, which, did it work for him before when he called them? No. Now, we don't know over the 20 years. Maybe they've kind of recaptured trust in him. But the reality is they're not going to be able to do what only God can do because this dream only came from God. Therefore, only God can reveal it. He wants to know, what does the dream mean? And this time he gives them the details, right? Remember the first time he's like, if you're really good at what you do, tell me the dream and the explanation. This time he's like, okay, you're right. No man can really do that except God. So here's my dream. I need you to tell me. But the guys could not do it. He told them all the details of the dream and they could not figure it out. And so Daniel finally shows up. We're not sure why Daniel wasn't there to begin with. It's a great question. Why didn't Daniel just show up the first time? We already knew that Daniel is the interpreter of dreams, and yet he calls his magicians first. Well, Daniel is a governor of a major province at this point. And so he's probably off doing his job. And so even though he's been called and he's the chief of the magicians because he's the one that can interpret the dreams, he probably had to take time to get there. So Nebuchadnezzar is pacifying his own mind and just listening to these guys until Daniel can get there, would be my biggest guess. And so he notices and kind of plays to Daniel's ego maybe a little bit and says, I know you have the spirit of the holy God or the spirit of the gods in you. Now, here's why that's important to understand what we're really talking about here. King Nebuchadnezzar is still a polytheistic God. He still follows a lot of these gods. It's how he was brought up. And so his filter, his language is going to continue to explain things in ways that he understands and that other people who are polytheistic are going to understand. So when he says he has this, that he has the spirit of the the spirit of the gods in him, he's really referring to, he knows that Daniel has something different in him. And so in most translations, it will imply and say it's the spirit of the holy God, because really that's what Nebuchadnezzar is referring to. Nebuchadnezzar is not dumb. He knows who Daniel is. He knows who Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are. He knows who their God really is. And he's finally come to the place where he says, okay, there's something different about your God than all these other gods, and he lives in you. You have his spirit within you. Big statement there. So again, it seems confusing to hear Nebuchadnezzar say the spirit of the gods when we know what he's really implying here, that there's a different spirit inside of you, and we know that it's the holy God. Is that clear as mud to everybody? Great. So then we get to the tree, and he talks about the tree, and he gives this explanation to Daniel of the dream. And there's things that we see about this tree. We see its size. We know that it's massive. We see its strength. We know that it's strong. We see its prominence, that everybody can see it from all over the place. And it's beautiful. It is gorgeous. And it bears a lot of fruit. It's very productive, and it provides shelter. Now, the kingdom that Nebuchadnezzar has built, because God has allowed him to, is very much like this tree. And so Nebuchadnezzar is going to represent the tree, because of what he has built. So when we see that the tree is about the king also refers to his kingdom. It's the same. It's all connected there. Because the kingdom wouldn't be there if the king wasn't there, right? And so the kingdom provides the strength, the shelter, the protection, the fruit, the prominence of what it is. And so the tree can represent so many different things. In Psalm chapter 1, verse 3, we see that it represents a man. If you have never read Psalm chapter 1, I would highly encourage you to go read that and apply it deeply to within your... Why don't we just go read it? Because it's so good. I just love that chapter. Instead of me talking about it. To me, it's the best way to start the Psalms. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly. So the first spot is where we should not be is don't walk in the counsel of the ungodly. Don't even be around it. Don't even play with it. Then he says, nor stands in the paths of sinners. Don't even be caught by guilty by association. You don't even stand near it. Nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight, the delight of the blessed man, is in the law of the Lord. And in his law he meditates day and night, and he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. But the ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. The tree is so vital. And in this passage, the tree represents King Nebuchadnezzar. It also in Ezekiel can represent a nation. In chapter 13 of Matthew, it represents Christendom today. And then in Romans 11, it represents an olive tree, which is for Israel or the Gentiles. So the tree represents so many different things. But in this instance, it's going to represent the strength and the power of King Nebuchadnezzar. Because he really has done some good stuff. I mean, he's conquered pretty much the whole known world. He has built palaces beyond anything we could have ever imagined. He created a hanging garden, for crying out loud. And this hanging garden is not just a bunch of green grass and a little bit of flowers. He literally put a mountain on top of his palace because his wife loved him. That was where she was from. So he creates this elaborate garden for her. Creates a watering system, a mechanical system to get water up from the Euphrates River up to top of his palace to water this thing. This dude's brilliant. And yet he's crazy as a loon. It's usually the way it works, isn't it? Any thoughts on 4 through 12? Anybody? Not really in the good stuff yet, the crazy stuff yet. Do you see the problem in verses 4 through 7, 4 through 6? What's the focus that he's focusing on here? Himself. It's here's what I've done. Here's what I've accomplished. Here's what my skills have gotten me. Here's what I have done. And so there's that weird spot for us of, is it okay to be proud of what we've accomplished? Like I battle back and forth of being proud of my kids or am I being prideful for my kids? It's a weird spot. But the king in this instance, it's not just about being proud of what he's done. He is being prideful about what he's done. I will tell you real quickly, Sally's done a phenomenal job with our kids. In fact, it's more the Lord has done a phenomenal job with our kids. It's not me or her. It's our willingness to allow him to use us to make them into what they are. And they're still rotten. Because we're all rotten, if we're honest. But God is a good God, and he wants to work with each of us as long as we humble ourselves before him and allow him to cut away the junk that's a part of our lives. And that is what's happening with Nebuchadnezzar. He's not willing. He is so focused on himself and how strong and mighty he is and all the things that he's accomplished, he forgets that it's really about God. So let's get into 13 because we're going to see some things in 13 through 18 that will help us understand really what set him off. He says, I saw in the visions of verse 13 of my head, while on my bed, there was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and cut off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts get out from under it and the birds from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. In the tender grass of the field, let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. 7 times meaning 7 years. This decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he will, and sets over it the lowest of men. Think about that. Nebuchadnezzar in the stream is listening to this holy one say, hey, let this dude be sent out to the field and let him finally know that it's God's kingdom that is the most important one, and that he sets who he wishes above the earthly kingdoms, and usually it's the lowest people that he uses. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is the most powerful man on the planet at this point in time. How do you think that made him feel? Awful, right? His pride just got shot down quick. He's being attacked. And so you can see the restlessness and why he's so apt to be so caught up. Verse 18, this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now you, Belshazzar, declare its interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation. But you are able, for the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. I love his confidence in Daniel. It's not so much in God yet, but in this instance right here, right now, it is in Daniel because of Daniel's God, whose spirit lives within him. So back to 13, we find it, he's seeing a watcher or a holy one. Now, these watchers are holy one. In this instance, will see all, hear all, and tell all. And it teaches this watcher in the verse 17, it teaches that the living that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men. Even with the biggest kingdom, with the biggest king, God still rules there, whether they can see it or want to admit it or not. Even with our own government or any other government you want to throw out there, or any other national ruler right now, none of them are there without God's permission or God's allowance, which in some instance causes us to say, well, why would God allow that? Well, let me remind you, we live in an evil world and evil happens. So in those moments, here's what this watcher teaches. He teaches that God gives rule to whoever he wills. Which again, we would say, why would a loving God do that? Because he's a loving God, he's a just God, and certain things have to take place, and he knows what he's doing. I don't understand it all. I'm okay with that. Could you imagine if we did understand it all? He sets up over the lowliest of men. And maybe that's what bothered him the most. Maybe he realized, wait a second, I'm the biggest king, I've done all these things, but now they're telling me that it's this God that has put me up? Well, I've done this. He didn't do this. He wasn't here. He didn't conquer all this land. He didn't build all this stuff. I've done this. You can see the conflict there, because that's what we do. We have conflict within ourselves of, well, I've done this. No, God has blessed you with the ability to do that. No, I've paid for that. Well, God gave you the job to earn the money to do that. Well, I've said this. No, God helped you with that. It's a different mindset. And that's hard for us because the world wants to encourage our pride. And God says, no, I want you to get away from your pride. Humble yourself and realize that I'm the only reason that you can do what you do. Now, it's one thing for us to say it, but really, for the most part, Nebuchadnezzar is a self-made man. His dad did not come from royalty to where he just was next in line. Nebuchadnezzar has worked his way up, and so he feels entitled to this title of king. I've earned this. His dad came from no royal birth. In fact, he was extremely humble, and you can find records of him calling himself the son of nobody. That's pretty humbling. Or in my littleness. That's a statement of humility, kind of. It's kind of like saying, well, I am humble. right? It's not. It kind of works against itself. I'm the most humblest person you've ever met in your life. Oh, really? Yeah. Okay. So there's a portion here where this seer is revealing something to Nebuchadnezzar that he really doesn't want to hear. Does that ever happen to you when you're reading scripture or maybe in prayer or see something and God reveals something to you and you're like, nah, I'm not listening to that? Sure we do. Sure we do. In this story, most likely the watcher or the Holy One was an angel in this vision. And so when we see watcher or Holy One, it's most likely a pagan type explanation. Again, we're dealing with a polytheistic God follower. And so he most likely is using the language that he understands the best to explain what he's seeing. It's kind of like when we go back to Revelation and read John and he's explaining all these things that he may not be able to explain because he only has a limited vocabulary to work with. Well, same with Nebuchadnezzar. He only has a limited knowledge of what he's talking about. So he's trying to explain this thing. Because with the Babylonian religion, they have a council of deities. They believe these deities meet together and they work together and they help each other out. So that's where the watcher, the Holy One, comes in. But for us, for Christians, we don't really believe that at all, actually. And then it was bound with the iron and bronze. Many people believe that it was to preserve and help it grow back, because we know that it was promised that if he would repent, his kingdom will be restored to him after the 7 years. And so it's kept until it is restored, which, by the way, is very intriguing to me. We're going to talk about the end. Hopefully we'll get there tonight. But how in the world does the most powerful man in the world go cow crazy for 7 years, literally living in a field eating grass, and he not lose his kingdom? Seriously. I mean, the moment a president is elected, the powers that be are automatically trying to get him out in our nation. And now we have a nation of the most powerfulest man in the world who has gone literally crazy for 7 years, and there is no record of any kind of insurrection at all. And after 7 years, we find records of him coming back into power. Well, we'll talk about that because I have opinions about that too. I have opinions about a lot of things. So any thoughts or questions from 13 through 18? Well, y'all are making this easy tonight. You know what it is, Linda? They're not fed. They came in hungry. They can't even think straight. That's right. Any thoughts? Oh, good. Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, you know that this was God ordained. Yeah, absolutely, yes. And God said, find that out. Find it. Yes. And so in the bigger scope, that's what I'll say at the very end. Absolutely, it's really all God. It's just surprising to me. I think Daniel had a lot to do with it as well. I think he had a lot to do with it. So yeah, yes, totally God, all the way through this thing, start to finish. Anybody else?
Just a little thing in defense of Nebuchadnezzar. One of the things that you find with these people in power, these kings and even politicians today, is they surround themselves with people who are, you're really great, look how great you did, and they're always pumping them up as well. So, as Nebuchadnezzar kind of goes through and looks at this, look how proud I am of what I've done, it's because he's also surrounded himself with people who are also telling him how great he is and how wonderful he is. So that probably contributes a little bit to his,
ego.
Yeah. He's hate to say it, drinking his own Kool-Aid, but
sure.
But that's kind of
Yeah. That's a great pill. So Heathen Bill is taking the side of King Nebuchadnezzar. Just kidding. But his point is very valid that depending on who we surround ourselves with, if it's a bunch of yes men, then they're only going to build your ego up, even though they should tell you what you need to hear. And so King Nebuchadnezzar probably had the ego the big as the room because he had people that were telling him, man, you really have done a good job. You really are the man. That's why I appreciated Charlie so much, because he never built my ego up at all. He made sure that my ego stayed very small. That's funny. Any other thoughts? Good point, Bill. Anybody else? Yeah. Yes. You gotta look at Yes. So in reference to how did the kingdom remain? Yes, 100%. God is absolutely involved in it. And really the second in command is Daniel. So he would be the next ruler. And I feel like, honestly, without getting too far ahead in the book, I think all these guys were scared to death of Daniel. I mean, anybody that can tell a dream and then interpret it and rule with such confidence and poise the way that he ruled had to be very intimidating for these guys. Sure. Okay, that's true. His buddies can't walk in fire. That's true. Yeah. I'm not going to mess with Daniel because those guys. Yeah. That's funny. Anybody else? All right. Verse 19. We may actually get through a chapter tonight. Maybe. Verse 19. Then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, was astonished for a time, and his thoughts troubled him. So the king spoke and said, Belshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation trouble you. Belshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. 19 is such a great picture of their relationship. The king looks at his second in command and says, this is really bothering you, isn't it? Don't let it bother you. Just talk me through this. Help me understand. Totally different from, if you don't tell me what it is, I'm going to throw you in the fiery furnace. If you don't bow, this is what he looks at his friend, really, of 20 years or so. This kid that has grown up in front of him. And he has learned to trust and to have probably a good, healthy relationship with, even though they are on totally different spiritual planes. And he looks at Daniel and says, Don't let this bother you, dude. I will take whatever it is. I will work through it. And he looks at King Nebuchadnezzar and says, man, I wish this wasn't it. What a great picture of how we should interact with the world. He didn't look at him and say, oh, you are in for it now, King. You shouldn't have been living this way. He doesn't do that. He says, man, I wish it wasn't so. Verse 20, the tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached to the heavens, and which could be seen by all the earth, whose leaves were lovely and its fruit abundant, and which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwell, and in whose branches the birds of the heaven had their home. He is building up and reiterating the importance of the dream that he just said. All of these things that you have provided, all these things that you've said, these are good things. Think about that. You grew and became strong. Isn't that what God calls us all to do? To grow and be strong? He says, your height reached to the heavens, and which can be seen by all the earth. We want to promote Christ in such a way that we want him to be seen. Whose leaves were lovely and its fruit abundant. We want to produce the fruit of Christ, the fruit of the Spirit, to where people can experience that. Under which the birds and the beasts can be safe and be fed. We want to be a place where people can be comfortable. And he looks at King Nebuchadnezzar and says, that tree that was just so eloquently explained and dreamed of, it's you. I wonder what his response was in that moment. Did he take a sigh of relief and thought, yeah, that's what I thought. It was me. But then the rest of the dream is interpreted. He says, it is you, O king, in verse 22, who have grown and become strong, for your greatness has grown and reaches to the heavens, and your dominion to the end of the earth. Daniel is not puffing his ego up. He's just stating a fact. That's a fact. This king has done amazing things and grown his kingdom. Is that a false statement? No, it's a true statement. And inasmuch as the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts of the field till 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king. It's almost as if the king knew what the first part was, but he needed to understand what was coming for him. And this is the decree of the Most High. Daniel, again, is reiterating, this isn't my words. This is what God is trying to help you understand. And notice that he says Most High. Why? Because Nebuchadnezzar recognizes the Most High. He knows that there's something different above the gods that he has worshipped. He says, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. They shall drive you from men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat grass like oxen. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Again, remember, these are the words that Nebuchadnezzar heard in the dream, and he's telling Nebuchadnezzar now, here's how it's going to play out. You're going to be driven from the kingdom out into the fields. You're going to eat the grass. The dew's going to fall on you, and you're going to lose your mind for 7 years. And as much as they gave the command to leave the stump and roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be assured to you after you come to know that heaven rules. Notice the importance of that. You will regain your sanity after you give the respect to God that he deserves. Love that. Therefore, O king, and hear the tenderness in Daniel here. Let my advice be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by being righteous and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. He says, King, listen to me, please. If you have never heard anything else I've ever said, hear me right here, right now. If you want this to look differently going forward, here's the trick. Stop doing what you're doing and live righteously. And I would say that to all of us, actually, tonight. If you want your life to look differently moving forward, stop the things that you know you should not be doing and live righteously before holy God. You might be amazed at what happens to your life. You just might. So notice in 19 and a couple other verses, Nebuchadnezzar, as he's telling this story and as it's being written, he's using Belshazzar and Daniel, his Babylonian name and his Hebrew name. So I believe what I find interesting in this is when Nebuchadnezzar is recounting the conversation, he uses Daniel's Babylonian name because that's what he would have used in conversation. He wouldn't use Daniel. He would have used Belshazzar. But when he's telling the story for all to hear, he's not only using Belshazzar, but he's using Daniel to make sure that Daniel is attached to the Most High God and that everyone who hears this testimony knows that it's Daniel's God who is doing this. I find that really important. It's kind of like when we tell stories, we tell the stories of the names that we feel hold some value in the story and others we don't share because it doesn't really add value. That adds value. Having Daniel and Belshazzar adds value to the story, for my opinion. This dream shocks and saddens Daniel. We find that in verse 19. 20 years of relationship and friendship. We have no idea what this relationship looks like, but we can get a pretty good picture in verse 19 and verse 27. There's such a tenderness there between the two of them. I think Nebuchadnezzar knew something was coming down the pipeline, and he trusted Daniel to share with him what he needed to hear, not what he wanted to hear. And Daniel, because of the tenderness of his heart and his care for his king, he says, "You are my Lord and my king." He says, man, if you'll just stop doing this, live a different way, this can be possibly avoided. There's a tenderness there. He knew the ups and downs in the king, and he doesn't want to share with him. Think about this. The last time that the king got upset was what? With the boys in the fiery furnace, and he chucked them in the fire. Well, Daniel's getting ready to tell him, hey, you're getting ready to be knocked down off your high horse. You're going to go out and live in a field and eat grass for 7 years. Your kingdom's going to be taken away from you for a little while, but you're going to get it back. He has no idea how the king's going to react to that. How would you react? I don't want to go eat grass. Right? And who knows what can happen in a matter of 7 years. I mean, look at the last 7 years of our lives. Lots changed. And now this poor king, I'm taking your side now, this poor king is living out in the field for 7 years. Who knows what could happen to his kingdom? But Daniel assures him, the moment that you recognize God as the Most High, and his kingdom is better than yours, it will be restored to you. What a great response. But the king encourages him to do so, again, which underscores their trust and the friendship they have. And he says, don't let it bother you. And he says, the tree is you. And he describes the reality of the tree. And it really is amazing. I think we should not gloss over that. What Nebuchadnezzar has been able to build and allowed to build is phenomenal. It really is. There's nothing wrong with stating that Nebuchadnezzar had a big part in creating one of the is it 7 wonders of the world? I don't even know. Like one of the greatest things ever, with the hanging gardens and the palaces and the things that it is monumental as to what he's done. He's a strong, great world leader. And as the tree grew, so did his power and influence. And it was a large tree. It provided food and lodging. He always boasted of his great conquests. In fact, one of the conquests that he did was he went through Lebanon constantly and saw these big cedar trees and actually had a picture made of him cutting one down to kind of show that, yeah, they are massive and strong and big, but I'm the king of the world right now and I can take you down. It's a little prideful, I must say. But with this tree that represents him being cut down, it is told to him that the stump will be left alone and really protected, to where at some point in time, it will grow back. Daniel continues and says, but because of your great pride, you will be humbled. Your hair is going to be matted by the dew. It's going to be unkept, gross. You're going to eat grass like the wild animals. And this is going to last until you acknowledge God. Your nails are going to grow out. And people are going to just think you're crazy because you are. And he's going to look crazy, but here's the problem with this. He still maintains his consciousness. There's one of the, who was I listening to? I don't remember who I was listening to. It's either from Dallas Theological Seminary or Gary Hamrick. It was saying a documented case of a man who actually thought he was a cow and went out for many years. You could talk to him. He would have a conversation with you, but he would eat grass and he would just live outside because it's a literal thing, which blows my mind. But there is promise of restoration once he acknowledges God and encourages him to repent to avoid the fullness of the punishment. And why doesn't he? Why didn't he repent in that? So many times we make that really quick confession because we don't want the penalty coming, right? We hit the altar really quick because we don't want whatever's going to happen tomorrow to happen, and we hope that if I just confess my sin, it'll just all go away. Well, there's consequences that come. And so in this moment, maybe the reason he didn't is he already had the promise of restorative work coming, so I'll just weather the storm. There's many of us that live on the idea of, well, I can just pull a 1 John 1:9. I'll just confess my sin to a faithful and just God who is faithful and just, who will not only forgive me, but cleanse me. So I'll just go do what I know I'm not supposed to do, and then I'll just go ask for forgiveness for it. Please don't live that way. That's not really what that is encouraging us to do, just so you know. It's not an escape clause in all of this. We are challenged to live soberly and righteously and as humbly and as honestly as we possibly can. That is our goal, not to abuse the grace of God. Sorry, I got a little preaching there. I'm not sorry, but I am. So for me, I don't know why he didn't, except for the fact that he's just stinking prideful. He's just prideful. Any thoughts on 19 through 27? Oh, man, we got to hurry. Yes, please.
Who are they? Like they are going to do this, they are going to do that.
So they will be the seers and the watchers. The Spirit of God will cause him to be in this spot, and they will watch over him. And it could be the townspeople of, okay, you got to go live out there. You know, one of the things I thought about too, I know it's out in the field, but he did create this massive hanging garden. What if he just lived up there? I don't know. Just thought. Any other thoughts? Good question. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. Yep. Yes, so he's allowing these things to take place in our lives in order to teach others. Yes. And that is such a hard lesson to accept for us, isn't it, Tatiana? Yes. 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 Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I do agree with that for sure, because 17 absolutely does say it, like, so everyone can see it. Sure. Anybody else? All right, I got 5 minutes. So let's go quick. 28 through and 30. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of the 12 months, he was walking about the royal palace of Babylon. Did you catch that in verse 29? How long? And we think God is a mean, nasty God ready to strike at any moment. 12 months this dude had to change his life. 12 months. The king spoke as he's walking about his royal palace, most likely on top of the hanging garden so he can see everything. Is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? While the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. Yikes. And they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. That very hour, the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men and ate grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like birds' claws. A full year of grace to make this change. I find that fascinating. A couple of verses, Ecclesiastes 8:11 and 2 Peter 3 verse 9. 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 9 talks about how long-suffering he is. He is not slack concerning his promises, as some men will count slackness. He is on his own time schedule. And I am so grateful for that, by the way, because it takes me a long time to come around sometimes. And he's walking on his roof, maybe among the hanging gardens, but probably in a place where he's able to see the entire cityscape. And his heart swells with great pride. And he says, look what I've done. Look at all these things that I've built. And it's a simple, honest, but prideful statement. It's a simple, true statement. He did create Babylon. He created these great buildings. There are 49 building inscriptions that have been discovered so far that simply say, I am Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So, in fact, Gary Hammer talks about the bricks all have stamped inscriptions of King Nebuchadnezzar on them, every one of them. And so this dude literally has his fingerprint on every building in there. There's 17 religious temples. There's 2 massive walls that he created, one wide enough for a chariot to ride on top. There's canals that he created for commerce. He created the Ishtar Gate, which is a double gateway and decorated with bulls and 4-legged dragons, as well as lions. It's very ornate. And then the Hanging Gardens, as I told you before, was created for his wife, which is the Princess of Media, who had lots of mountains. And so this Hanging Garden, he created it for her to where she could feel like she was at home. And it created a hydraulic machine, seriously, to get water from the river Euphrates up top the palace to water this joker. This guy has done great work. The problem is he doesn't acknowledge who blessed him with that. Amid his boasting, he is struck with a mental illness. Now, there's two different thropies that it could be. It could be lycanthropy, which is insanity, which causes people to act like wild animals while retaining inner consciousness. Or it could be more specific of a boanthropy, which they believe that they are a cow or an ox. And again, they still have their inner consciousness, but they're just acting different. I've never seen that. I think I want to. It'd be weird, right? To see a dude sitting out in the field just chomping on grass, chewing the cud. They moved him to the fields. There were no institutions back then for crazy people. They just shoot them out. Remember the guy that was possessed by the demons? He was living in the cemetery. And this is documented, by the way. There are documents talking about a mental disease that took over a king. And there's historical documents to show that King Nebuchadnezzar led just fine up until a certain point, and then it goes silent, and then it picks back up where he comes back into power. And guess how long that little gap is? 7 years. Crazy. It's just coincidence, just so you know. Verse 34 and 35. At the end of time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven. And among the inhabitants of the earth, no one can restrain his hand or say to him, what have you done? This is a man who seemingly has turned the page. If we go back and listen to all the things that he said before he met God, now he's met God and had a massive interaction with him, and now his tune has changed. He realizes he was not in control, that God was. He humbles himself. He acknowledges God as the Most High. All of those statements in 34 and 35 are all statements pointing the power and the glory to God instead of himself. Verse 36, at the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my honor and splendor returned to me. My counselors and nobles resorted to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth and his ways justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to put down. What a testimony. Everything is restored, his sanity and his kingdom, and he acknowledged God as the sole ruler of all. So any thoughts on the rest of the story, 28 through 37, before I hit these last little thoughts? We're going to go a little long tonight. I hope that's okay. But we're almost done, I promise. So, how is the kingdom restored? It's that question of, he's gone for 7 years. Anybody could have jumped in there. Well, obviously, the good Sunday school and right answer is, and true answer is God. God told him ahead of time that this is what's going to happen to you, but I'm going to preserve your kingdom and restore it back to you. So we know that God had a hand in it. What we don't know is, what did God deflect off and who did God use to do it? One of my thoughts would be he used Daniel, second in command. And what kind of conversation do you think Daniel had with his rulers? Okay, guys, let me tell you what's going to happen. Our great king, the one that has built this amazing place, he's going to go a little crazy. And let me explain to you what that's going to look like. He's going to be acting like a cow or some type of wild animal. He's going to go out in the fields and he's going to live there and eat grass and look just weird for about 7 years. So, guys, our responsibility is to protect him and to protect his kingdom, because after 7 years, he's going to come back to his senses and be restored and come back to us. So, guys, we have a lot of work to do, but he's going to be crazy. Could you imagine that conversation? But it had to have happened, because literally he went out and was crazy, but his kingdom was preserved all the way through there. How did no one attack? Why was there no coup then? Well, I believe because Daniel was there, God was there. And I think because of the relationship that he had with King Nebuchadnezzar, he was just able to hold it together. The other question that we have to ask and is popularly debated is, was he converted? Was King Nebuchadnezzar truly converted? Some would say that yes, he was. Some would say no, he wasn't. Some would say we really can't know. Here's my opinion. But let me help you understand why I believe that. I say yes. I say he absolutely was. One, God's the only one that knows the heart of a man. And God said that when you turn your heart to me, when you turn your gaze to me, when you turn your prideful heart around and recognize who I am, I will restore your kingdom. We see that his kingdom is restored. Now, this is a little bit of mathematical stuff here. It's the reverse way that we go about it. When we see his kingdom restored, it implies that his heart was where it needed to be, or else God would not do opposite of what he said he would do. Does that make sense? And so I believe that because God knows the heart of the man and because his restoration was there, because he acknowledged God, that yes, he was truly converted. And I also wonder, why do we never hear anything else about him? I mean, the first 4 chapters are a battle between God and Nebuchadnezzar of who has the more power. And then all of a sudden, Nebuchadnezzar relinquishes his power, acknowledges God as the holy God, and we never hear another word from him. Because we don't need to. Opinion. I don't believe we need to. I believe his heart changed. And I think the reason we probably don't hear anything from him is because his heart changed in such a way. I believe he was probably removed from power because he was just ruling different than what everybody else probably wanted. So you can land wherever you would like. I would encourage you to think through that. That's important to think through. It's not important as to whether you're going to go to heaven or not, but it's important to consider. How do we determine when a person truly has followed God and made that change? How do we know? What fruit do we see? How can we tell when someone has truly changed their heart? In this instance, I believe God has said, when you change your heart, I'll restore your kingdom. And because his kingdom was restored, we can make the assumption clearly that his heart was changed. Any thoughts? Any questions? Any smart remarks? I'll take those too. Yes, sir.
Chapter 5, his grandson dealt
Gotcha. So you're saying his grandson, while he was out in the field, was actually ruling in that time period until he came back in. Sure. Right, which would make sense. If he's already in there doing it, he has a feel for it, and it would be the next logical choice. Absolutely. Anybody else? Yes.
So I'm trying to, I like looking for parallels and other
Sure.
stories and stuff like that. So I don't know, hopefully I've got this right, but Simon the sorcerer from Acts.
Mm-hmm.
So he accepted, and he got baptized, and then started, like, no, I want more, I want to do this, I want to do that.
Yep.
I want to lay hands, I want to give. And say, so was Simon converted, or was he just tripped up and just, as a new convert, and just went sideways?
Sure.
So that's where I kind of sit with this. Is he just struggling? He's
Yes.
not mature enough along the way,
right,
to really, and he needed that extra guidance.
A little extra push.
A little extra push.
Sure.
My second thought is Nebuchadnezzar was born in the wrong time. If he was born now, he could just say he identified as a cow, and no one would have.
Oh my gosh.
I was holding on to that one for a while.
Did y'all hear that? You didn't. Here's what Mr. Bill said. If he was born in this time period, he could identify as a cow and it would have been okay. Bill, you made me repeat that. All right. Everybody good? All hearts and minds clear? Yes, ma'am, Miss Jackie. My favorite mother-in-law. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, that in the studies, the guys that I listened to, they actually liken Nebuchadnezzar and Saddam Hussein together a lot. In fact, Saddam Hussein had a coin made with both his and Nebuchadnezzar's faces on it to show that he was trying to basically recreate Babylon. Yep, that's true. Anybody else? Awesome. All right, next week, chapter 5. Everybody good? All right, that's great. God, thank you for being so good, so great. Thank you for being so patient and so kind. Lord, I appreciate your patience with me, your patience with us. But Lord, help us not to take a year to make changes in our lives. Help us not to be so stubborn that when you call upon us and say, hey, let's work on this, we are ready and willing and brave enough to take on the task of making a change in our life that would honor and glorify you. Thank you for this story. Thank you for the challenge. Thank you for all that you do. I pray you continue to be with the families that are here and the families that will be listening. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great night. We will see you next week.